Welcome to episode 27 of the New Barbarians podcast. Today's Tuesday, July 8th, 2025. The podcast will hit the platforms later today. Today we're joined by Chris Maher, founder and general partner at Samaritan Partners. He's also the head coach of the Darien Little League Challenger Division, and I'm one of the assistant coaches on that same Little League team. Can you just say hello, Chris?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Hey, Bill. Great to be here with you today, and always good to see you, my friend. And you are a superstar assistant coach on our Challenger Little League team,
Thank
which
you
we'll
for
get
that.
into. And yeah, we'll get into that a little bit later. But
He's a
great,
player
great to be here.
coach, Chris, because I get to have him as a
And
player here, so I can tell you that works well.
well, he's the best. He's the best pitcher we got, and I'll explain that comment later.
Well, welcome, and I'm looking forward to this for a number of reasons. So I'll just quickly recap a little bit of the quantitative finance world recently. It seems like the markets are still a little bit crazy, but settling down with everything that's going on in the Middle East. I actually don't have all the factor performance at my fingertips, but um, we did see a return to normalcy and the risk on from last week, as we said. And then, I've actually been taking a focus with Wolf Research on AI infrastructure, which not surprisingly is a hot place to be. And what's interesting is there are like subsectors and other areas where I think that there's just been outperformance in the stock market where people are trying to get more and more exposure to the AI space. So think about data centers and energy, as we've spoken about in previous podcasts, are just a hot space. And I'll let Mark recap a little bit of the macro space, and then to the extent I have more to fill you in with on factor performance, I will. And then we'll talk to Chris.
Excellent. All right, so I'll take over here, Bill, on the share screen portion, which is always perilous duty, but let's go. All right, so folks, hopefully you're looking at the world's largest group of central bankers assembled on Bloomberg's floor. Is that the case? Not yet.
I think you're still experiencing your technical difficulties with the
Oh
screen
boy.
share. Oh, there.
Oh, it was that second again, Bill?
It looks like it's coming up slowly.
And oh yeah.
It went away.
Okay. All right, so we're going to do one more thing here where we're going to make it a smaller screen, guys, because we cannot have 2 weeks in a row. All right. So what I'm going to show you guys is last week, I think it was right before we had our, or right after we had our podcast, Francine Lacroix Bloomberg had the world's central bankers assembled in the Bloomberg studios, not for a G10, but what I looked at it was a circle the wagons for Jerome Day. So you had Bank of Japan, Bank of China, you had Bank of Korea, Bank of England, all there sharing notes on what's going on. And I think they're doing it because they do not have the playbook for what's coming next. And all the other central banks, the majority of them, have lowered rates. Bank of England, Bank of Canada, ECB. And here, I'm going to give it one more shot here on this other screen. And they all got together and shared their process. I was talking to a colleague of mine about this at lunch. The Fed has changed their process 3 times in the last 3 years. They're modeling. So when you want to talk about confidence, which Jerome knows he has to do, he has to message confidence. The next thing you're going to hear, and guaranteed, is that they are now doing scenario analysis. So what that means is that they're taking bones and they're going to roll them on the ground and see if it's going to rain for the harvest next year. And that is how monetary policies being run at the moment. So I just want to give a little love to that literally circling up Jay Powell doing the man spread. But now let's go to numbers, less commentary. I know that we can't see this. I'm going to give it one more shot on the presentation side to see if I can share a presentation. And that would be, no, hold on here. Okay, let's see if that works. Good. 3 strikes, you're out. So this is what we want to talk about. In our screen here, major assets, you've seen the market scorecard before. Germany, their ETF is up 35% through the first half of the year. That's because Germany broke their debt break. We keep talking about that for good reason. When you talk about fiscal austerity and discipline, the Bundesbank is the first, second, and third leader in that camp. And what did they do? In 08, they had to break it. They had to go up to 85% debt to GDP. They spit in their hand and they shook and they said, we'll never do that again. They made a constitutional amendment to put a debt break in 2010. Not 30 years, 20 years later, they ripped it out. The debt break is gone. They had to do a fiscal expansion in order to fund NATO because the U.S. walked away. So they are an inflationary, believe it or not, dynamic now, and that's driving the equity market. So right now, if you want fund flows, you have to have a fiscal policy. That's why Germany's up 35%. The next largest asset is gold because it's finite. The next largest asset, as you called it, I don't know, Chris, if Bill read you in on my main game, which is Bitcoin. Bitcoin's the next largest asset class, up 15% year to date. And then the euro. The euro is almost zero growth in the Eurozone. And that currency, who's got a lower interest rate than the U.S., is up 13.7%, and the U.S. dollar is down 10.6%. The largest 6-month first half decline since 1973, and that is a rogues gallery of time when you talk about presidents in office, war, and what was about to happen with the committee to re-elect the president at Watergate. So we're not talking about wonderful times, folks, when the dollar's down 10% in the first 6 months of the year. So that's the lay of the scorecard. And I'll finish it by saying the previous 5-year award winner, the FANGs, are scattered. You have Netflix up 46%, and you have Tesla down on the order of 23%, falling with each massacred car on the lots in Los Angeles and California. Very different market. Leadership is not quite there, except for German equities, gold, and Bitcoin. So we'll leave it there. And, Bill, I'm going to go back to you and Chris, because we heralded this session as not really focusing on the promise of Bitcoin or AI, but really what people are supposed to do. How do you, Chris, coach folks and work with people to keep their head in the game when everywhere you turn, it's, screens are giving our kids depression, AI is going to take your job, and the like. One reason why we wanted to have you on the call was because of your approach with people. We talk about things all the time, but people still make changes, and we'd love to hear more about that. I know Bill's going to run that segment, but that's why I showed up. I want to hear how you do it, maybe get some free advice myself.
Well, thank you, Mark. I appreciate that.
And awesome. I love that preamble, and we definitely will cover all of that, Mark. I'm very excited, as I said. And I'm also going to potentially
you are
show
showing off now. That's
a little
such
bit
show
here.
off, Bill. That just hurts, man.
There it is.
So as I said, that there weren't any major factor movements recently. This is just a daily. So, yesterday there weren't any 2 standard deviation events, so no statistically significant moves, but you can see price momentum is performing well. Value is not. So again, this is just risk on, and I'm, as usual, borrowing my factor research from Wolf. And rather than get caught up in these charts, just that sort of confirms what I already said. And so we successfully did share a screen, and with that, we'll jump into the interview with Chris. So I guess we already covered some of it, and I may have failed to mention that the Darien Challenger Little League team is for a special needs community here in Darien, and it's sort of fitting that Chris has started a venture capital fund that is for profit, but focusing on that same community. So we'll also get into his coaching career, but why don't we just start off with you telling us about Samaritan Partners?
Sure. Thanks, Bill. And thanks, Mark. It's such a pleasure to be with both of you today. And I definitely learned a few things on the preamble by both of you there about the financial markets. I think I'm going to become a weekly listener moving forward for sure, with all the uncertainty going on in the global markets. And to give a little bit of background with Samaritan. So Samaritan Partners is a social impact and public benefit venture fund. It operates like a traditional venture capital fund, but it has a very specific investment thesis or focus, and that is the disability sector. The genesis for starting the fund has to do with a couple of aspects of my background. So one, from a business perspective, I'm new to being a venture investor. I spent the previous 25 years, I started the fund about 2 years ago, but the 25 years prior to that, I was actually an operator and a multi-time CEO in a variety of small to mid-sized VC-backed companies that was largely in what I would call internet tech and digital media. Several times through merger, acquisition, or IPO, I ended up working for larger and sometimes public companies, which was a wonderful experience for me. But I always gravitated back towards that early stage of entrepreneurship where you're building a team and scaling a business. And then in parallel to that, for the last almost 22 years, my wife and I have raised 2 beautiful daughters, both of whom live with disabilities. So my oldest daughter, who just graduated from college, has a physical disability. She has a form of hemiplegia on her left side. And my youngest daughter, who just graduated from high school, was born with pretty significant intellectual and developmental disabilities, and will likely never live completely independently. Time will tell. She will not go to a traditional college experience. She'll go to what they call a life transition program, which focuses more on life skills and job skills and executive functioning. But she's a super happy kid and doing really well. And that's our normal. We don't know any different, and we wouldn't change a thing. Our daughters are amazing. Not going to lie, there's been some ups and downs along that journey for us as a family. And because of that, I think my wife and I have always been a little more aware and sensitive to other families and people along a similar path or journey. And so for me, in recent years, I started to think about how could I bring together 2 things that I'm really passionate about. One of which is early stage entrepreneurship, and the other is helping people. And that was really the impetus for starting Samaritan Partners, which, as I said, is a social impact venture capital fund that invests in the disability sector. That stated public benefit or social good around the fund is the following definition. So we invest in early stage for-profit companies that are providing products and services to the disability community and or creating employment opportunities. And we typically invest between the pre-seed and Series A stages, really trying to provide that early stage, as they call it, catalytic capital, but also really trying to roll up our sleeves and help these companies operationally. And this comes into, Mark, your point before about the mentoring and advising and coaching that I do a lot of with not only the companies that are in our portfolio, but also companies that are not, but that, some of which hopefully will be in the future. And so far, we've made our first half a dozen investments, first 6 investments, about to make a seventh. It's actually in the fintech space. And let me stop there. And happy to answer any questions or dig into any elements of that.
All right, so I'm going to be building on the question I asked you, Chris, about for-profit, because too often, what do you want to call us? Scallywags in the business for a long time, turn a nose up at diminished returns if you're trying to help someone. How could it make money? Is it a social governance ESG type project? Chris, are you doing this out of the beneficence of your heart and all that, or is there enough opportunities for you to say, yeah, I can invest in a power plant, or I can invest in a tech startup, or I can do what you said, about the latest endeavor you did, where the returns and opportunities are economically the same? Is that the case? And if so, have you run into the people like me who sort of say it can't be the same, or am I an outlier?
Yeah, great question. And listen, it's a fair and the right question to ask. And I think that I believe, yes, there is a tremendous opportunity for financial returns in the disability sector, in addition to helping improve the lives of what I think will be millions and millions of people in terms of our portfolio. But let's first take a step back, Mark, and just talk about the market, okay? Because I think these numbers, most people don't understand that the size of the disability community. It is the largest minority population on the planet. It's in the neighborhood of 1.5 billion people, and that number will more than double in the next 25 years. Okay, so it's a massive market. 1 in 6 people globally have a disability. 1 in 4 adults in the US have a disability. And disability is part of the human condition. If you don't have a disability yourself, you certainly know someone that does, a family member, a relative, a friend. If you're not born with a disability, there's a very good chance that at some point during your life, you are going to have an accident or an illness that will bring you into the community either permanently or temporarily. And oh, by the way, we're all going to age into the disability community at some point in our lives, okay? And the other thing about disability is it has no bias or prejudice. It affects all of us, as I said before. It's part of the human condition. But it's also not confrontational because it cuts across age, gender, socioeconomic status, geography, religion, ethnicity, right? It cuts across everything. And so the size of the market is massive. Now, historically, the disability community has largely been supported by nonprofits, charities, and local and federal government. And that's great, but there are limitations to how much those groups can really elevate the community to where it needs to get. And so there, I believe, and it's why I've decided to focus on disability, there is a very unique opportunity for private capital to come into this part of the market to provide that early stage capital and operational assistance for incredibly innovative companies at the earliest stages around assistive technology, software, hardware, and also then to partner with the nonprofits and the local and federal governments to really elevate the community to where it needs to be. And so I think there's a unique opportunity. It's early in the curve. The number of VC funds that are focused exclusively on disability, I can count on one hand. I know them all. We invest together. We talk all the time. When I think about Samaritan and the returns that our investors are going to get, I think of it actually in 3 ways. One is the social return. And with our company, with our fund, which is on the smaller side of VC funds, I'm in the process of raising $10 million. As I said before, I've raised a chunk of that. We've made our first 6 investments. I think in total for this first fund, we'll invest in about 15 companies. I have no doubt that that portfolio of companies will be having a positive impact on millions of lives in totality. From a financial return perspective, time will tell. We don't talk about the fund as being concessionary because we're going to go for great financial returns.
And define that term, Chris, for the
concessionary. There are social impact funds out there that say, hey, we're going to deliver a concessionary return, meaning we're going to deliver below market financial returns to emphasize the social impact or the social good. And some funds will just come out and say, hey, we're going to just state it up front that we're going to give you a lower financial return than a traditional fund, but we're going to make up for that with the social impact that we're going to drive. I think conservatively, the Samaritan Fund can deliver LPs a 2 to 3 times multiple on invested capital. Now we're going to go for more than that. Time will tell if we're able to achieve that. And then I think there's a third leg of the stool here in terms of return that I am very passionate about and I think is incredibly important. And I think our LPs care about it as well. Is I think another thing that Samaritan can do is bring more private capital to this area of the market. I have already done that with traditional VCs, social impact investors, individual investors that have not looked at disability as a market to make good financial returns, but they're realizing that, wow, there's some amazing technology. You talked about AI before. AI is going to have a profoundly positive impact on the lives of people with disabilities. And we can jump into some of the companies we've invested in, as well as some of the other companies out there. But that's a role that that Samaritan is already playing in bringing additional private capital to this market, which I think is extremely important because we need more of it.
Well, thanks for that. So I heard you say it's a huge market, 1.5 billion people. I heard you say that it's under followed. You're one of the few in it, and that it's a growing market. And then couple that with your personal experience and your background positions you. So the reason why Bill wanted to have you is because you are, again, a disruptor and a well-placed one. We like to have subject matter experts on the call here. You obviously have lived it, you've worked it in the disability space, and now you're taking your decades of experience and applying it to an economic model. Great stuff.
And yeah, I think interestingly, like I've always been of the, I'm full on capitalist. So I always believe that, capital finds good investments, and what you're doing, I think, is going to encourage, better investments in this space. And, I looked at your deck and you do pass on plenty of investments and you're very selective and that's what a venture capital investor does for their investors. So, 2 or 3x sounds pretty good to me. I don't know how to compare MOIC among the various different types of VCs out there, but that's certainly appealing. And it sounds like there also isn't a lot of competition in this space that has a lot of economic value. So, 2 out of 3 people on this podcast have a child with disabilities, and we know it's expensive, and we get help from the government in certain cases. And, basically, like, I know that I'm going to be spending a lot of money on the, disability space for the rest of my life. And ideally, I'll be, finding better and better things for my son. And it sounds like capitalism is the right way to drive the best products to help them. So when I heard about this, I was excited just because I think it is very consistent with like this capitalist belief. And capital will find the best investments, and people like you will help enable that.
Well, thank you. And I agree with 100%. It's interesting. A little side story. Back in spring of 2019, when I left a job as a CEO of a MarTech company, and I was really getting that pull. Marketing technology. I was really getting that pull for wanting more meaning in my work. And I actually thought, well, maybe I should go run a small nonprofit to get that fulfillment. And, my wife and I have volunteered a lot of time and given money over the years, but I didn't really know the business side of nonprofits. And let me preface this by saying nonprofits are amazing organizations, and they are an important part of society in serving and helping many times underserved and underrepresented communities, and or really putting awareness and education and funding behind really important things like, climate change and sustainability. But I didn't know much about the business side of it. So I went and talked to a bunch of people, and I came away from that process and realized that's not the place for me to go work. I will continue to volunteer and to give money, but it's not where I want to go, start my next career. And there are three main reasons why. The biggest one is nonprofits typically don't have a self-sustaining financial model. So they're constantly having to ask for money or raise, funds or receive grants to support the commercial enterprise of a nonprofit. And so
and Chris, isn't it
yeah.
the case that some of them actually aren't allowed to have more than 1 year of cash served? Like that's not. I don't know if that's.
I don't know that. That's a
Okay.
great point. That would be another reason why I wouldn't want to go work there. But if you're the executive director or senior member of a nonprofit organization, you're spending most of your time raising money and schmoozing with your donors versus driving the mission forward. So that's the big thing. And Bill, like you, and I know like Mark as well, I'm an entrepreneur and a capitalist at heart. And so that really pointed me in the direction of the social impact space. And it took me a few years to figure out, do I go in there as an operator? Do I go in there as what ultimately became as a capital provider and operational supporter? And so, again, nonprofits are wonderful organizations that do so much good for society, but I really wanted to be in the for-profit space, because here's the other aspect of investing in mission-driven for-profit companies. The whole objective that we have as a fund is to help these companies not only to scale the social impact that they're delivering and to create sustainability around that, and the way you do that is through having a scalable and sustainable commercial model or financial, business to support that. And what is just so exciting to see is, if I had a nickel for every time I spoke to an entrepreneur in the for-profit, disability sector who said, yeah, when I told people that I was starting this company that was focused on neurodiversity or physical and mobility disabilities or blind, low vision, et cetera, everyone's first reaction is, well, why aren't you doing this as a nonprofit? Because I think just mentally people think of, oh, it's the disability community. Oh yeah, nonprofits help them and the government helps them. And so these entrepreneurs get it that, no, we need to do this in a for-profit way to create scale and sustainability.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say about these entrepreneurs, which I think is critically important as it relates to startups in general and innovation in general, is most of their ideas for their businesses, their products and services, are coming from lived experience. Either they personally or someone, a family member, a friend, has been impacted by that area of disability or something specifically related to disability. And so they're building products and services around real problems that need real solutions. And so you could argue they're starting off with a real product market fit versus a lot of companies out there where it's like, oh, this is a great idea, let's go build this, without knowing if there's product market fit or not. And by the way, I've worked in a company that was incredible technology that did not have product market fit. And so we were a solution looking for a problem, and that's a really bad place to be as a company.
Yeah. What you're talking about, my youngest son he started excess food, a marketplace for excess food for restaurants, where they'll just have a software at the company, at the restaurants, and then people in the area will surveil the app, look for extra food coming on. And it was something that he said his college friends were like, some of them didn't have a place to live, like college, what do you want to call it?
Yeah.
Lack of food's a real deal. And so he came at it from that position, and he's trying to do good, but he wants to make money. He's in there, and the investors want him to make money, and that's the best way that he can serve the population. and to be sustainable. And it's the only reason the restaurants are agreeing to work with them, because they looked at his model. And
Yeah,
otherwise,
I
you'd have
love it.
more food waste. Yeah. So
That's
that, I think
awesome.
it's a,
That's awesome. Good for him.
and
Tell him if
and
he
you,
ever wants to, if he wants to chat sometime, I'd love to connect with him.
I
That's
will, I
awesome.
will. Yeah, and I'll plug it. Goodie bag if you're in, in Colorado, down in South Carolina, North Carolina. Um, but I must have asked Chris in the last 2 days 3 different ways of, are you really making money? And I'm surprised he got in the podcast because I was annoying the heck out of him. We didn't have a time for a proper catch up. But yeah, it is, Chris, how we're like, really, social impact and profit. I've never heard someone talk about the model where without sustainability, economic sustainability, you're a drag,
Yeah.
effectively.
Yeah. I mean, there's a book that, and I'd like to think that when I was in the purely for-profit space, I was leading with some of the tenets of this. But there's a book that John Mackey wrote, who's the founder and CEO of Whole Foods Markets, the supermarket chain, called Conscious Capitalism. And part of the thesis there, and there's enough data now because there's been enough, with ESG and sustainability and social impact. 15, 20 years ago, there just wasn't enough data to understand whether you could have purpose and profit go hand in hand and be successful. The data that's out there now is that you can, and in most cases, over the long term, profit and purpose wins the day versus just profit in the long term. In the short term, there are a lot of just purely for-profit companies that will accelerate and do better than a profit plus purpose company in the short term. But over the long term, those companies are outperforming, and that's in the public markets and the private markets. And I also think there's a demographic shift happening in the country. Your son, think about the business your son started, okay? It's not, there is a mission, there is a social mission to it. I think about my daughter who is going to be 22. She and her friends, they vote with their wallets. If they know there are companies that are mistreating the planet or mistreating people, they're not going to buy their products and services. They want to know that companies have a conscience and that have a purpose, and it's not just about making money. And so I think the demographic shifts that are going to be happening over the next decade or two, I think companies are going to have to lean into more than just profit, which I think would be great for humanity, but
Yep.
time will tell.
And then I think on that note, I do have to circle back to Mark mentioned. Oh, looks like we lost Chris, but Mark mentioned ESG, and I think, from a quantitative perspective, the most of the returns come from the G, governance, and I think that it's correct to assume that there will be increasingly more coming from the social aspect if society is actually changing and people are going to spend according to their belief systems. I also did want to just reintroduce Buster, who I think barked pretty loud right into my mic, which is why I typically put it on mute.
Yeah. Bill is not a family of dogs. He just has one dog and does make appearances now and again. And we will have to get Ali on as well. We'll have to have them maybe meet. Maybe that's a type of business we can get. How to have a podcast and not have your dog bark. We'll rent people out to help you. Bill, I don't know if, to tee up Chris when he comes back.
Yeah.
I was talking to my buddy here, whose office I'm in, and he said, "All right, I thought you guys were more about digital assets and AI. How does Chris come in?" I'm like, "We are. We're about disruptors." Um, and you can cue Chris in. We're about disruptors in digital assets, and we think digital assets and AI are the two largest disruptors in industry. I think Bitcoin by far is the unique animal in the game. Bill really introduced me to AI in December when we were talking about doing the podcast, and I've been just blown away by both its hallucination inclination as well as its utility. Both amazing. But we talk about things, about uh, digital assets, about AI. What are they? But one thing that we kind of gloss over, and you, Bill, in particular, I get some of these incomings from college students, recent grads, saying, how do I get involved? What do I do? And the reason I want to bring that part up is because half of what we do is engage with people who are asking us questions, seems they can work with us, trying to connect them with other people, Chris. And the word you use, which I love, is purpose over passion. Because I think that anyone's job in college is to get a job, not a career. That comes later. But the number one thing is, back to like Aristotle, I'm sorry, Socrates, I think, is know thyself. And if you know what you want to do and where you want to be, it's going to help a lot and cure a lot of ills. You'll be best positioned. So, on that purpose over passion, go back to that 2019 moment when you, a couple decades into a career, said, if I really want to gear it up, I got to do this, not that. What was that? How did you get those signals to try to help the younger crowd figure it out, maybe?
Sure. No, it's a great question. And I think it wasn't overnight and it wasn't this like light bulb aha moment. I think it was something that was brewing over time. And it took me a number of years to figure it out. I was at a point, Mark, where I thought, yeah, maybe I'm not going to be able to combine this fulfillment with my job, and I'm just going to stay in that whole kind of world of internet tech and digital media, purely for profit, and I'll have to get that fulfillment outside of work. And I was a little bit resigned to that, but I kept kind of noodling on it. And your whole point about passion versus purpose, ideally, it's really passion, purpose, but where you're leveraging what you're good at, right? And so that's the Venn diagram where if you can, I'm passionate about a bunch of stuff, but I can't make it my job. I'm just not good enough at it, right? Um,
And Chris, I just want to jump in. The reason I
yeah,
say that is I think a lot of people are selling passion to the younger generation or anybody, just selling it. And if you think of passion, it's not fleeting, but it's fire. It's great. It can be a motivator. I don't think it carries the day, and I think it can be an avocation, not a vocation. And that's why I do
yep,
like teasing out that distinction, not ignoring it, but know that there is a difference, I think, between the
yeah,
two.
yeah. And when people say, I kind of joke when say like, hey, like, how long did it take you to come up with that idea for Samaritan Partners? I'm like, yeah, about 30 years. Because it was a culmination of, my college coaching background, which I know we'll get into later, which was what I first did when I got out of college. And then it was 25 years of kind of early stage business building, building teams and building businesses. And then it was the personal experience of raising two daughters with disabilities for 20 years. And the culmination of all those things really kind of coalesced around the idea of Samaritan Partners. But it took me a while to figure that out. And really, how do I combine that purpose and doing something that's a bit more meaningful or mission driven or social impact, whatever you want to say, in a for-profit way around a skill set that I've developed things that I think I'm pretty good at and that I also enjoy doing. And so that took me, I mean, I'm 58, I was, 56 years old
Hmm.
when I started Samaritan Partners, maybe, just not quite 56 years old. And so, yeah, so I'm with you. It took me a little bit longer than maybe some people.
Hmm. Yeah.
Well, we certainly have some old timers on this podcast. I was playing in the Masters League of tennis in Fairfield County last night, and I was kind of happy that someone asked me if I was too young for this age group. But
You do have the baby face, Bill.
well, so do you. You don't quite
Well,
look
thanks.
your age either. Um, so yeah, I do want to get into the coaching, and I also just like realized it's kind of funny if we have product placement. This is one of our partners. Um, well, quasi partners in the data space actually gave me this cup. So I wanted to give a shout out to Jack and Kessler over at Maiden Century, um,
Okay,
and
Simon
perhaps
Cowell.
perhaps also just revisit some of your marketing and current experience, but uh, we definitely wanted to cover the coaching because I think that directly does translate into some of what you're doing in the VC space and the advisory
For sure.
coaching.
And yeah, 100%. And it served me incredibly well in the 25 years of working in and leading for-profit businesses, in digital media and internet tech. And so the quick background on my coaching background is I actually, so I was an assistant coach at several different Division I schools for the better part of a decade after I graduated from college. The kind of strange thing about that story is I actually played football in college and ended up coaching basketball. Or basketball was my first love. I was just a little bit better in football, and it helped me get into school, to be perfectly honest. And but the love for basketball really stems from my mom. Who this past season completed her 50th year as the girls varsity basketball coach at my high school in Irvington, New York. And so she would hate me to say this, but she is a bit of a legend in Westchester County girls basketball and the state of New York. And she happens to be the winningest high school girls basketball coach in the state of New York. She would tell you that, well, you win. Yeah, if you stick around long enough, you can win a few games. But I grew up, as a little kid, sitting on a ball in the corner of the gym with a box of donuts, watching her coach the girls, every afternoon during the basketball season, and then became a player myself, and then followed her footsteps and in the coaching ranks. And it was a wonderful experience for me. I don't know if I could do that job today at the Division I level with NIL and transfer portal stuff, which is another conversation. But I believe my decade in college coaching is where, as they say in the business world, I really started to develop and hone my soft skills, my people skills, right? Teamwork, collaboration, communication, mentoring, coaching, leading. You don't learn that stuff in a classroom, at least not when I was going through school. And those people skills served me incredibly well when I transitioned to the more traditional business world in the late 90s. So it was kind of the better part of the decade of the 90s. I was in college coaching, and in the late 90s, I was very fortunate that I left coaching when I did, because I stumbled into the whole world of the internet that was taken off in the late 90s, the consumer internet, and then spent 25 years there. So it was a little serendipitous for me there. But those skills absolutely served me well. Not only, and I got into sales, which made sense. It was similar to recruiting, in the college coaching experience, and then moved up into sales management, and then into general management, and then into CEO roles. And I'm very much of a generalist, although I definitely lean towards kind of sales and marketing, and but that is very much what a coach does. Is trying to get the right people in the, on the bus or on the team, giving them direction, and then giving them the autonomy to go execute, but getting everyone to really put the team or the business first, and themselves second. And so, yeah, my coaching experience has served me incredibly well, and now incredibly well in my entrepreneurial experience, and now as a VC, a big part of what I do is a lot of mentoring and advising and coaching, not only with the companies in our portfolio, but I try to help companies before I invest, right? Try to build that relationship, try to add value. Several of the companies that we've invested in, I was adding value before they were raising money. And then when it came time to raise, they called me up and said, "Hey, Chris, like, we're kicking off our raise. There's a spot for Samaritan if you want it. because you've been so helpful. And so, and I just love, I was in that spot, right, several times as an early stage entrepreneur. And this Mark gets back to something that you talked about before. I've had my own coaches and mentors and advisors. I still have them, and relied on several of them very heavily when I started the fund. But I learned that as a CEO of a for-profit business, it was probably not until my third CEO job that I learned how important it is to surround yourself. Not, you've got your board, right? Your investors, but that's different. You need your own kind of small group of consiglieres, people you can trust, people who have the lived experience of running businesses, of being an entrepreneur, that you can go to, because it can be a very lonely experience as an entrepreneur, as a founder, and especially if you're not a co-founder, if you're a solo founder, then it can be really hard. And so I try to play that role for the startup entrepreneurs that I meet these days, but I still have my own network of advisors and mentors that I still tap into myself, and it's critically important. So when I started Samaritan, it was an idea in my head, but I was also interviewing for a bunch of CEO jobs in kind of like the small to mid-sized VC back space within, digital media, that world I had been in for 25 years. And I had breakfast with a good friend, and his name's Luke McGinnis, and he and I had worked together at two companies. We're catching up. He's like, "Hey, so what are you up to? What are you thinking?" And I told him about some of the jobs I was interviewing for and looking at. And then he's like, "What else you got?" I'm like, "Well, I got this other idea." And I described very high level, and I hadn't even come up with the name, but what's Samaritan Partners? And he goes, "That's it." He goes, "Let's talk more about that." He goes, I can tell the look on your face, the tone of your voice, that's getting you excited." He's like, "I think you should go away, put it down on paper, and let's talk again in a couple of weeks." And that was the nudge I needed, right? That was the nudge I needed to push forward and really take that idea seriously. And within several months, I was well on my way to setting up the fund. And if not for that breakfast and that nudge from my friend Luke, I don't know if I would have moved forward with it. So
This is why you're here, because there's so much going on, and everyone, whether it happens or not, AI does do what we think it's going to do, and shift jobs, hopefully push people up the margin curve. There's so much going on. Everyone needs a Luke. Find it, because there's opportunities, but you can't look outside yourself. You have to be aware of the market, but you got to know how you're wired, what makes it. And oftentimes, like you just said, and I have an example of that when I hit a tough time in college with a death in the family, and it was horrible. And I was at college, and I kept pushing off a test. And teacher said, "Well, I came back from the funeral, and teacher said, who was a coach, a former coach, and a mentor
wow.
to the football team." He sat me down. He goes, "Well, tell me what's going on." He goes, "Okay, you can go back. Take it next Tuesday." Well, I come Monday night and I say, "I'm still not ready." He goes, "Okay, do you have a few minutes?" He talks to me broadly, talks about kids on the team who had to deal with cancer, had to make decisions about whether or not they wanted to stay in school on the team. He's telling this, and he said, "Mark, I can't make the decision for you, but if you want to stay here in school, you're taking the test tomorrow. But if you need to
Yeah.
be home, you need to be home." It
Yeah.
was, I've told that story so many times because he didn't try to make me feel better. He knew I was avoiding a
Yeah.
decision I had to make. And all he did was spend 15 minutes with me, set the room up so that I could make the decision. I knew I did not want to go back home. I wanted to be in school. So I had to put my big boy pants on and go
Yeah.
through it. And those are the
That's
type of
amazing.
people that, those mentors or the guys like Luke who know you well enough to say, you don't even see it, but I see it.
Yeah.
That's what I
Yeah.
think when people are looking for jobs, those are the people you want to surround yourself with.
I agree 100%. Thanks for sharing that story. That's amazing.
Yeah, good people, man.
Yeah.
UVA had a lot of them.
And since we're on the topic of friendly nudges, I also would have to throw in my 2 cents. I started my entrepreneurial journey last September, and I owe a lot to my partner Debbie, who basically just said, "Bill, like start publishing content, get out there. And um, you know, that was the main thing for me. Like
Yeah.
my background in quantitative research was like, start researching and have some motivation to get it out there. And then the next thing I know, we're starting to get business. And now it kind of reverses. I'm like, Debbie, yeah, now this is real. We're actually bringing in clients. We have to like really do this together. But I certainly needed that nudge. And like now we are also doing a bit of the coaching, as we said before. There's even a bit of overlap between what you're doing and what we're doing in the like fintech startup space.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. I love that. We all need it. We all need the nudge. And early stage entrepreneurs, a couple of things, and you both have done it. And so like, it's not for everybody. It's a very bumpy ride. It is a roller coaster. And so you've got to have a thick skin. You need to be resilient. You need to not get too high when it's going well, and you can't get too low when you're having those really hard days. And it can be extremely lonely. And the sooner you learn to surround yourself, Mark, as you said, with people you can trust, people who know you, the better you're going to be. But I think a lot of entrepreneurs, they don't figure that out until they're down the road pretty far. I mean, I as I said, I didn't figure it out till like my third CEO job. And just organically, I was reaching out to friends on a regular basis. And then finally one friend's like, yeah, man, like you need this little personal advisory board. That's different from your board at your company. It's different than your executive team that work for you at the company, because you can tell those groups some stuff, but not everything. And it's super lonely and really hard. And so, the fact that you guys are now doing that work with early stage companies is fantastic. I don't think it's something that's taught in the classroom or in business schools, and certainly not enough about that entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah. Who does the most structured approach? And I'm leading with a question I have an opinion on, which is Stephen McCovey's book, Trust and Inspire, which I think has been out there a while, but is a departure of the command and control CEO top-down approach that we all grew up with. Is that something that has come and gone, or is there still vestiges of that being adopted, or is that not really indicative?
Yeah, it's a great question. I love the question. I will be honest. When I first moved into management roles in the early 2000s, I was probably not a Jack Welch, but I was definitely a little bit more traditional command and control. Wanted everybody in the office every day, wearing suit. The guys had suits and ties on. We weren't doing casual Friday. And then as I evolved, and honestly, as the market evolved, sometimes out of necessity, because I was in, early stage companies that we went through some, as I tell young people today, and I think all of us are of an age where I went through 9/11, I went through the dot-com bubble bursting, I went through the financial crisis of 07, 08, 09. I've been through, there have been a couple wars in there, went through COVID, like some pretty massive stuff. And sometimes even when your business is doing well, there are market dynamics that you have no control over that have a negative impact on it. And then you have to make changes. I was CEO of a company within a very large company when the financial crisis hit back in 2008, and we were very profitable and doing well and growing. But because the parent company had such exposure to financial services, my boss came to me and said, you got to cut 20% of your staff, because the C-suite was worried that they were definitely not going to hit their revenue number that they told, because it was a public company, and they had to prop up their EBITDA. And so I had to go restructure my business and cut 20% of my staff when we didn't have to. And so, going through that lived experience can be incredibly difficult, but very valuable learning lesson. I tell people, I have a master's, but I didn't get an MBA. And I just have a master's of arts in higher education, which is another story. But probably one of the best learning experiences for me, where I tell people like it was my MBA, was when my first job after coaching was this company called Jupiter Research, which was similar to Gartner in terms of syndicated research and analyst advisory services, but for the business to consumer internet, which was, exploding at the time. The first 2 years of the company was this rocket ship up. We went public, we merged with another company, and then the dot-com bubble burst, and it was like 18 months of like a death spiral. That 18 months of the death spiral, where we went from a $90 million company to like a $15 million company. We had several rounds of layoffs, and we ended up selling off the 3 different business units. That was one of the greatest learning experiences I've had. It was incredibly painful, but I never could have learned the stuff I learned during that process. I don't think I ever could have learned in a textbook or a classroom.
Or would you maybe wish on people, except that it was instructive? It is hard.
Yeah.
I mentioned that cheekily because I've been in, maybe not the same, but similar. Winding down is very hard,
Yeah.
and because it just takes the oxygen out of the room, and it's hard to keep people motivated, the whole bit. Yep.
Yeah. Agreed.
So I would like to make sure we cover a little bit of Samaritan, as well as like where to find you and stuff like that. But before we move on to like the last segment, tell us about when you got the nod to be the head coach of Challenger and Darien.
Well, that's right. We are on video. So like people saw my face light up and smile. And so the Challenger Little League program, as Bill said earlier, so everyone knows Little League, which is a national program in the U.S. Most towns across the U.S. have a Little League program. What most people don't know is there's a subdivision called Challenger Little League, which is Little League for children with disabilities. And it's of all disabilities. It's broadly disability, completely inclusive. And my daughter became an athlete in that program 11, 12 years ago. When did Ollie, Bill?
I think more than that. Yeah.
And
I
I
was thinking
shortly
more like
after,
15.
yeah, I don't think we're 15. You might have joined a little before us. And so Bill's son, Ollie's a junior, right?
He's going to be a senior.
Going to be a senior. So Ollie's a year behind my daughter, who just graduated. And so they've been in the Challenger program pretty much the whole time together. And shortly after Olivia, my daughter, became an athlete, I became an assistant coach, volunteer coach. And did that for probably the better part of a decade. And then the couple that was running this amazing program for us, the Donahues, Mike and Cece, who didn't have any kids in the program, but have personal connections and family ties to disability, ran that program for 13 years. We just did our 26th season, I believe, Bill. And they got to a point where all their kids were grown up and having grandkids, and they're like, we need our weekends back to go spend time with our grandkids. And Mike and Cece approached myself and my wife to take over, as Bill says, running the program. It is a team effort. Like, there's a group of incredibly dedicated parents like Bill that really make this program work. But there's kind of 2 elements to it. So Bill and I are coaches, and we get to do the fun part. We show up on Saturday mornings for a few hours, and we get to coach up the athletes and their buddies, which I'll talk about in a second. And then my wife and several other moms, they really make the whole show run, because they're the administrators behind the scenes, schedule and everything. And the magic of the program is, and we've got, this past year, we had 42 or 43 athletes, between a young group, which is like first, second grade until like 6th or 7th grade. And then an older group, which is like 7th, 8th grade until 21, when they age out. And so we had about 42, 43 athletes between the 2 groups. But the magic of the program is we pair the athletes with disabilities with high school kids. And that relationship is magical. And is really what the program is all about, because these relationships between the athletes and the high schools, and I think a lot of the high school kids probably initially when they're freshmen think, oh, I'm going to do Challenger because that'll look good for community service on my college resume. And they quickly realize this is one of the greatest experiences that I could have. And after 3 or 4 years of being a buddy to athletes with disabilities, those relationships, I think, are as profound, if not more, for the buddies, the high school students, as they are for the athletes. And that is just, you're not going to find a place on the planet on Saturday mornings where there are more smiles and hugs going around than a challenger little league program. And so, yeah, we've been involved in it for a decade plus, as Bill and his family have been. And and I tell people, and I mean it, like it is my favorite morning of the week. We do an indoor season in the winter, and then we do an outdoor season in the spring. And it is just it is one of the more magical programs that is out there.
Yeah, 6-month season isn't really long enough.
Yeah, agreed.
And I do pride myself on one thing, and that's making sure everyone gets a hit. And this year, I think I gave up. If you include the winter season, I probably gave up 10 home runs.
So let me elaborate on that a little bit, if you guys
Gave
will let
up
me.
10 home runs.
No. So Mark, we have some athletes that have pretty severe disabilities. We have a young girl who is a wheelchair user and nonverbal. We have a couple of other athletes that use kind of a walker with wheels. A lot of our athletes have some physical limitations and challenges to where and vision challenges where eye-hand coordination is hard. And so they start off hitting off the tee when they're really little, but we quickly move them to where they're not using the tee. And part of that is as I said, Bill is our best pitcher. Bill has mastered the art of throwing the ball and hitting the bat for some of our athletes. And it's yeah. So Bill's, as I said, he's the best pitcher we got, and I think the best pitcher in the league. Because here's just to give you a sense, with our older group, we play against other towns that have challenger programs, and we've been doing it for so many years. Like, we know the coaches and we know the athletes. Like, it's just one big happy family. It's awesome. But it'll take us an hour and a half to 2 hours to play 2 innings. Like, that's our game, and it's because everybody bats every inning. And there are some batters where it might take 25 or 30 swings to connect. Yeah. And but everyone loves it, and it's great. But Bill keeps when we're at bat, Bill keeps those at bats pretty short on the timeline, because he's pretty good at hitting the bat.
You have to know where the bat is going to be at a certain time, and then...
Oh, it's a science. Oh, it is. It's part science and part art, and Bill's got it down. Yeah.
Well, that about sums up Bill right there.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And so, just moving back to the discussion about Samaritan, you have 6 investments. Can you just tell us a little bit more about the types of companies you're investing in?
Sure. Yeah. So it's 6 investments broadly across disability. One is an accessible travel company called Wheel the World, and there's 2 parts to their business. The part that's kind of mostly market facing is they basically have a travel booking site like an Expedia or a Priceline, but all the inventory on their site has been verified for accessibility. So hotels, resorts, et cetera. So they've gone into those physical spaces and they've documented that there are curb cuts and ramps into the hotel. The doors are a certain width. What a lot of people don't know is, for especially like people who are wheelchair users, the height of the bed is critically important for them to have a good experience. Obviously, ADA accessible bathrooms with shower seats, et cetera. But another side of their business is they're now doing accessibility assessments for the travel industry, hotels, cruise lines, DMOs, destination marketing organizations that have venues and restaurants and et cetera. And so they're really becoming kind of like the good housekeeping stamp of approval for accessibility. So that's kind of like a B2B SaaS part of their business, which is super exciting and is growing very quickly. But they want to make travel accessible, not just for some of us, but for all of us, which is fantastic. Another company that we've invested in around the blind, low vision community is called Be My Eyes, and they've got some pretty good press recently from some partnerships they did. But they have an app, so if you take your phone and download the Be My Eyes app, they can support blind people in a couple of ways. And they've got upwards of 1 million blind people around the world using their app. But you can click on the app, and they have 9 million plus, almost 10 million volunteers around the world. that I can, if I'm a blind person, I can press the app and then the first available volunteer will pop up and I just hold up my phone and I'll be like, hey, Mark, I'm looking for my blue sweater in my closet. Can you tell me where it is? And you're like, oh, it's the middle shelf on the right. Or, hey, I mixed up my medication. Can you read this bottle? Is this my Ambien or is this my asthma? Um, and so
It's
that's cool enough as
unreal.
it is. Yeah, it's amazing,
Wow.
but it gets better. And this is where AI comes in, Mark. They have built a, a large language model based on, they have a very unique data set. They have years worth, millions of videos of sighted people helping blind people. That data has gone into their large language model and they have a relationship with OpenAI. And they have an AI version of their app called Be My AI. It's just a separate button inside the app where if you don't want to pull a human to help you, you just click Be My AI and you hold up your camera and it will interpret whatever it's looking at in incredibly accurate detail. And that's largely due to the unique data set they have. So they're having a profoundly positive impact for the blind community, and it
Wow.
gets better. One of the partnerships they just announced is with, so you may have noticed Facebook or Meta rolled out these smart glasses. They're Ray-Ban smart glasses. They're actually glasses you'd want to wear. They look like Ray-Bans. They're really good looking. And there's a whole bunch of functionality in there, but Be My Eyes did a partnership with Meta where the Be My Eyes technology is integrated into the glasses. So a blind person, for the first time ever, can have completely hands-free accessibility. They put on their glasses and say, Meta, please call Be My Eyes. And the volunteer that pops up is looking through the lenses of the glasses and giving them a description of their surroundings and if they're navigating or needing to interpret something.
That's
So
like harvesting eyes out of,
it's amazing.
that's
It's
amazing.
amazing. Yeah. And AI is going to have, and I said it earlier, is going to have a profoundly positive impact now on the disability community. Having said that, there's also proceed with caution, right? Because I think the disability community has historically kind of inherent, sorry, I keep hitting my microphone, has kind of inherently had bias against it, historically in society. And there is a risk that these large language models could create bias in those models against the community. However, what is really
What do you mean by that? Mean bias?
so you could use data for good and for bad. So Be My Eyes had a decision to make. Some large technology companies that are building these AI models approached them about incorporating their data. And they're like, okay, well, we could do that because then they're going to have a more accurate model because we've got the best data source out there for the blind community. But they could also use it against us. They could also use that data to actually engineer to exclude the community. And so it's a slippery slope. But they sat with leaders within the blind community and talked about, hey, listen, we can either take a seat at the table and be engaged in this conversation and be helping to make these decisions around how AI is going to be used for our community, or we can let other people outside the community make those decisions for us. And I think they were smart and made the right decision to take a seat at the table to be involved in those decisions versus having other people make them for them. And that goes across all areas of disability, neurodiversity, deaf, hard of hearing, et cetera. So those are a couple of examples. I could give you a few more, but I don't know
Got
if we
it.
have more time.
Nope. That's great.
But yeah,
Thanks.
sure. One thing, and Mark, you and I had traded some emails prior, but it gets back to the people. And from a Samaritan, and it really has to do with my coaching background, my being an operator and a leader of companies, and now investing in companies. The process that I go through, or the lenses, and it is in this order, in doing due diligence to make an investment, is the first thing that I look at is what's the problem they're solving? What is the social good that the company is trying to drive, and what's their potential or ability to do it at scale? If I can check that box, the second thing I actually go to is not like what's their revenue opportunity or their TAM, their addressable market, or their commercial model. It's actually the people. I then look at who are the people behind the business, who are the founders, who are the senior team. My experience has been that the people behind an early stage business are as important, if not more important, in its future success or its potential for future success as much as what the business actually is. And so that I spent a lot of time with the team to get to know them, to really understand what makes them tick. And then if I can check that box, then I really do the deep dive on the commercial opportunity. What's the addressable market? What's their commercial model? Is it direct to consumer? Is it B2B? Is it B2B to C? Is it transactional? Is it subscription recurring revenue? But that's really kind of the flow of how we look at investment opportunities, and the people part of it is critically important. I mean, I've passed on what I thought were good businesses because of just things that were red flags with the founders and or the team.
Got it. Well, that's pretty relevant to any company now who, even if they're established, things are happening so fast, you need to rely on the team to adapt. There's no
Yeah.
such thing as, that GE model of the cash cow and the rising star. I mean, the cash cow is, is being milked dry by competitors at Bill and I on boards that we sit on. So, yeah, I imagine your phone might be getting a couple calls and having you come in and talk to people, figure out how they can coach. I know that's not your business now, but we may have to replicate you or something.
Well, that would be my pleasure. It'd be my pleasure. Bill, what else you got for me?
Well, I think we're gonna wrap up. We're at about an hour, hour and five,
Hour 10, yeah.
yeah. And so where can people find you? Where can they find out about Samaritan? How can they get involved?
Thank you. I appreciate that. So to learn more about me, you can look me up, Chris Maher, on LinkedIn. And my last name is M as in Mary, Aher. So please feel free to connect on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active there. For the fund, you can just go to SamaritanPartners.com. And there's a host of information about how we approach things, about some of our partners, the portfolio. I too have a podcast that I launched several months ago, and my co-host is this wonderful gentleman, Kelvin Crosby, who happens to be a deafblind entrepreneur and a master potter. He is the best. And we have a podcast called Investing in Accessibility. So you can just go to investinginaccessibility.com or go to any of the podcast platforms and you can find it there. And so the podcast is about the intersection of entrepreneurship, accessibility, and impact investing. And so we're talking to entrepreneurs and thought leaders in the disability community and kind of around accessibility. And I think that's probably, oh, and one last thing that I'm involved in, a project that's really cool that we're just getting off the ground. I know a group that took over a boutique hotel in West Virginia that is very accessible in terms of the previous owners bought an old schoolhouse. It's literally called the Schoolhouse Hotel, and it's in White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia. And the previous group bought an old abandoned schoolhouse, turned it into a boutique hotel with a lot of accessibility, and we're going to double down on that. And I'm going to help them. We've created something called the Accessibility Lab at the Schoolhouse Hotel, and we're bringing in even more accessible products and services and assistive technologies to make it an even more accessible and inclusive experience for their guests. So that's another, and there's a little tab on the Samaritan website about that, but that's another cool project that we're involved in.
Is that by any chance near any roller coasters or water parks?
Not right now. It's right next door. It's about 0.2 of a mile from the Greenbrier Resort, if you know that, down in that area of West Virginia, which is But no, they need a little kind of adventure park down there, which is similar. There's a group out of Texas called Morgan's, which has built an amazing complex around accessible amusement park there. But that's another conversation. But yeah, it's so yeah. But thank you for asking. Yeah, and anyone, please feel free to reach out. Always happy to chat.
Yeah, I do have a strict requirement about roller coasters and water slides.
For me, it's miniature golf.
That's a good one.
There you go. Yeah,
I like a good miniature course.
Awesome. Well, I will take all of the information you just shared and put it in the show notes so people can find you. And yeah, I'd love to have you join us again as we're both continuing on this journey now that we're both podcasting and sort of continuing. We have to do something in the off season, so until
Yeah,
January,
exactly.
when we
I
get
hear
back
ya.
on the field.
Well, thank you, Bill, and thank you, Margaret. Absolute pleasure
Pleasure,
to chat
Chris.
with both of you.
Yeah,
I really
same here.
appreciate it. Thank you.
All
All
right,
right.
all.
Thank you.
Take care.
All right, we are done on YouTube.
All right, so